Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Wolf Den podcast. This will be on the shorter side today because we have an interview with our teammate, David Lago, who just won back-to-back Ultimate Cups, piloting Blue Hybrid. So Zenitsu and I got together with him to just ask him some questions and really pick his brain about Blue Hybrids and BT7. I guess go ahead, David, you can introduce yourself.
Hey, how's everyone doing? It's a pleasure to be on here and just kind of discuss about my deck as well as my experience with both Ultimate Cups.
Okay. Why don't you start us off, Zenitsu? Just I guess this is fairly low, um, structure. We're just kind of talking, but whatever
Yeah,
comes to mind
so
first.
just for the record, you entered in both Cartamagica and Core over the past weekend, and those are two completely different events. Did you play the same deck back to back, or did you change them up for the event based on what happened in the other event?
I played the same deck, identical back to back. I like the way it performed on Saturday. Maybe one or two tech choices I could have potentially changed, but I left it as is.
What kind of like tech choices were you thinking about? Because the way that I'm looking at the list right now, for anyone who
I have it
is
pulled
following
up.
along, I'll have the deck list down in the description below. It may or may not be on screen. But like, what kind of tech options were you looking at? Right now, I just see the Mimi as the only like standout card, just because it's a purple card in a blue deck.
Yeah, absolutely. You want me to turn on my camera by any chance, or
It doesn't matter. I
it doesn't
usually
matter?
don't do faces anyway, so
Perfect, perfect. Gotcha. Oh no, just for like the mat still allows me to kind of visualize better. Yeah,
yeah.
so Mimi is really probably one of the only tech choices. And there's one more and another important thing in terms of this deck that I'll probably get into later. Um one card that I was considering swapping out, and this isn't to discredit her because I actually really enjoy this card, Mimi. Um if I were to switch one card, it would potentially be Mimi, either for like a Forbidden Trident or maybe Aqua Viper Supreme Cannon. One of those. Those are ideally some of the tech cards that you want because they perform very well against the mirror. However, this once again saying this isn't to discredit Mimi. I think Mimi is a very valuable card that comes up a lot. It just didn't come up as much as I would have liked on the weekend. Right, Hammer Spark becomes two. It's a card that allows for versatility. Right, you're usually being set to three because I do run four Davises. And something as simple as right hard playing a two-cost Tamer and maybe a Sora Joe to optimize the memory that you have in case they have a tamer as well, a memory cost tamer. The two drop allows for a lot of versatility, free ice wall, and what I do think is she does get underappreciated a bit because she does a lot of work that isn't seen. Right, a lot of times they could have a hammer spark in hand um, that she's preventing. You just don't know of it. So she can be kind of like an unsung hero. So I definitely do th- do enjoy this card. I might actually even keep her and keep the same deck. But if I were to change one thing, it'd probably be her for a potential other tech card like a Forbidden Trident or something like that.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
it's good that you brought up the Mimi because I know we've touched on the Mimi tech a little bit before and like why it's so I guess, ingenious. It's two cost tamer, like dirt cheap, and it's a +1 on both sides. It either gives you a two cost hammer spark or it makes your opponent's cost or give them 0. So that versatility is crazy for such a low investment, especially like just a one of tamer. Um, so I guess the only thing I'm really initially wondering is why only two Bokomon?
Yeah, absolutely. The two Boko are there. Well, the reason why there isn't more Boko is I think actually Boko isn't that great of a card against the mirror. Against every other deck, Pokemon is fantastic. It cycles five cards. You could potentially get two hits off of it. It's just against the mirror, it is not an ideal card. I personally believe, especially if you're playing against a blue hybrid that could kind of capitalize on it. I do run four Sora Joes and four Davises, but it's really there. You play a Boko, for instance, let's say you start the match, right? Let's do an egg and raising, and then you hard play a Boko. Right then and there, that Boko can't do anything, right? It will cycle 2 cards for you, but without a tamer, it can't really do anything. So let's say the opponent does an egg and then hard plays a Sora Joe. I did that multiple times actually, where my opponent played a Boko and then I hard played a Sora Joe. So now they have to consider what to do with this Boko. If they swing with it, they're threatening to potentially give me either another tamer or something like that. So I mean, if you have Boko at 3 or 4, it feels really bad. It can be denied by Madoki. It's a card that if it gets stunned, you really can't do anything about it unless you're running Aqua Viper, which I'm not. And you're basically telling them like, yes, you're getting value off Sora Joe, Matt. It's a card that it's hard to play around if you run a lot, and it can be a dead card. I personally don't think it's that great in the mirror. I think at 2 it's perfect, right? Because if you see it, especially early, just to get a +2 in your hand to get valuable pieces like a Davis or Sword Joe, absolutely it's magnificent. But like I said, it could if they're setting up a wide board with Madoki, it becomes useless. If they have a Sword Joe, it's hard to just hard play it. If it gets stunned continuously, it's really bad.
What were you thinking, Zenitsu?
I think that the Pokemon is it's a good card, but in the mirror, if the opponent has a Madoki and you don't have a way to get rid of it, yeah, it's just a lot harder to actually utilize properly, especially since you can't Evo on top of it. And that's kind of why I was thinking about Nemon as something cute, but I don't want to run into a situation where my Nemon just isn't doing anything and it's actually being a hindrance.
So, um, I mean, we've kind of already answered the question really pretty much, but like, you've exclusively built this for the mirror because we've kind of established that the blue hybrid is the big bad of the meta, and it's what you're if you're not playing, you're preparing for, and even in this case, you are preparing for as well as playing. And so, um, one step further, which matchup outside of the mirror, since you've also teched quite a bit for the mirror, were you most afraid of at slash like which do you think gave you the most trouble?
Gotcha, absolutely. Just to preface this as well, I should probably say that in both days I completely dodged yellow. I will say that. Um, I didn't play a single yellow hybrid deck. However, I don't think the matchup, especially even this deck, um, the matchup for blue is that unfavorable. If anything, I would say if both sides play optimally, it's probably maybe 50-50. If you switch out Beamy for maybe a Susano, just to avoid any threat of deck out, I think even blue is probably maybe favored if both sides play optimally. However, I can't really say I haven't played against. I've played against a lot of yellow hybrids, but maybe not in the most in the highest kind of competitive sense. So it's kind of hard for me to say that. In terms of what I played other than blue, what was the hardest for me? I will say that I mean Lilith Loop is scary. It really is, especially if you can't chip them out early, and essentially end the game somewhat early. Because if they set up a trash of maybe 10 or 15 and more, I mean I'll give a perfect example. Human, I believe his name is Ying Huang. I think he came third in Nats, and he has other notable tops and achievements. I played him second round on Saturday. And when that deck, I believe in game 2, game 1, same thing. I chipped him out early, and then I set up lethal for next turn. And he didn't really have the outs to kind of either clear my board or my tamers that I had set up for lethal. Game 2, once again, I was just chipping out early. He got a lot of value off scatter modes and analog boys that I hit. But you have to take risks sometimes when swinging into security. That's just the name of the game. Especially this deck where you don't really want to go that deep into time with, because Lilith Loop will end you in a turn if they're playing especially the Cerberus package. So in that instance, right, this is actually kind of funny. So I essentially what I did is I had an ice wall in hand. I had 5 security because he didn't chip me out at all. Um, and I think I had two guys on board and one tamer, and he had 3 security. So I said, all right, I'll swing with both these two. I'll Digivolve on top of this tamer, swing there, leave him at 0 security. I'll play an ice wall, and then I'll play a Davis. Or I played a hammer spark and then a Davis. I left him at 3. And I played an ice wall. So I basically said, have fun getting through 5 security with an ice wall.
Hmm.
And he did, yeah, he beat me that game.
Hmm.
He worked
I
out a
mean,
play. It was insane. It took like 15 or so minutes, but he absolutely just killed me that game with one turn.
yeah, Lilith Loop, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, and if you don't have a Madoki set up, they have no way of killing it. They could just gain so much memory, it's actually insane.
Yeah,
Loop's
threw
one
an
of the
ice
few
wall too.
decks that like inherently kills the floodgates. Like they usually just kind of go over them with the inheritable.
Yeah, when you say floodgates, you mean is that it's like Madoki in that, right?
Madoki and Sayaku,
Yeah.
like
Gotcha, gotcha. Yeah,
combined, is our terminology at least for like cards
absolutely.
that don't let you play the game.
Yeah, they have a lot of ways to stop, like just Death Claws, Elecmons here and there. There's a lot of ways to just kill Madoki. I mean, that's what happened. I think he swung Elecmon, lost to memory, and then was able to pop the Madoki I had on board, and then just went wild.
Hmm. Yeah.
Uh,
Go ahead, Zenitsu.
yeah. So, like knowing playing two big events back to back, playing barely any yellow, what are your like actual thoughts on the yellow matchup? Even though you didn't like quite experience it, like do you think yellow is actually a good deck to take to a tournament given the results that we currently have seen?
I think it can be. However, I think just it kind of works against itself, especially in these tournaments that are 9 rounds, 50 minutes especially, because yellow kind of inherently wants to potentially stall the game out a little bit, and that works against you, right? Especially if it's only 50-minute rounds. For instance, ideally, right, if I was playing yellow, once again, this is all kind of saying with I'm saying all these things without ever actually playing yellow, so take it with a grain of salt. I probably ideally I wouldn't even like want to like check blue security. I would probably just want to deck them out if I could, because yellow's probably running one or two Susanos, so you can just recycle, keep recovering here and there. The problem, like the matchup with yellow, is that the problem with yellow, especially in tournaments, is right. You will draw. You could potentially draw a lot of games. And you're playing kind of against the clock too. Like you probably will need to swing into blue, because if you lose the first game, for instance, right, you're really in trouble. Because you have to kind of accelerate game two a little bit and see if you could win, and then game three could also be they don't have an easy way to win quick, I guess is the saying, right? And it at times it does lack consistency. I just think the matchup against blue, like blue definitely has a lot of ways, a lot of win cons to win it, especially if yellow isn't drawing optimally. Um, Yeah. Like, do you guys want to know like how I would approach kind of the yellow matchup?
Yeah, because I know a lot of people are still very afraid of the yellow matchup, and I don't think that yellow hybrids is going away anytime soon. Just looking ahead briefly at BT8, the deck gets better because they have a mini Shine Greymon in the form of Rapidmon. So,
Oh
like,
yeah.
any knowledge building now is usually really, really helpful for the future. Even though, like, yes, we're talking about two different metas, the gameplay and how you approach it is still going to be relatively the same.
I might have to counter that in the sense that the way I would approach yellow now would probably be vastly different than how I would in BT8. Somewhat is it, essentially the thought process is pretty simple. Against yellow, ideally you can ship early if you want. Ideally you never want to swing with Sayaka. You always want to leave Sayaka on board. Um, Probably never swing with Sayaka because a Sylphie for one is just insane value. Um, you could potentially swing Madoki if it's no issue, especially if you see they're not running that many um, boosts or Bokos here and there. But um, you know, it depends. It is very situational whether or not you want to chip early because you could hit into some very dangerous things. But ideally, right, even if you do chip early, what you want to do is set yourself up for an OTK. That's essentially the main way to combat yellow. Set up a potential lethal in any which way. Don't be afraid to maybe not go don't go too wide, right? Because the Schwartz could be very bad. But don't be afraid to go wide with like three Digimon. If you get Schwartz, you get Schwartz. Do it again, right? See if you could set it up again. Yellow, like I said, the deck the game will usually go into the long run. But ideally, you want to set up turns where you're threatening lethal and you're making yellow react to the potential lethal turn you have next, right? Whether that's going into a Jet Sylph to recover to prevent that lethal, well, that's great. Now you have fodder for Sora Joe potentially, right? If you could stun that Jet Sylph. Then they go into a Dynus, once again strip the source, stun it, leave it there, and that's what we have a Zulong for, right? A Zulong is a big card in the yellow matchup, especially if they leave people on board where you continuously stun them. If they're Jet Sylphie swinging, or if they go into a Jet Sylphie at all, and they don't have like tack retreats or anything like that, I would never swing into a Jet Sylph. Maybe a lot of people, swing into Jet Sylph, crash with Beowulf just to get it off board. Very situational, of course, right? Some cases you might need to, but ideally I wouldn't do that. I would just strip the source to potentially get value for Sora Joe. Do your best to set up tamers. Set up as many tamers as you can. Once again, right? Because that's threatening. That's another threat of the OTK, especially Sora Joe. Sora Joe's massive in that matchup. A Zulong, right? So the win cons are basically setting up an OTK with a wide board and potential tamers to go for it. A Zulong is another win con, especially if they're running like God forbid, two Dynasts on board. Um, and I mean the cards to look out for that could really make your day worse are the purple Karis and TK and Kari. Although I will say TK, if they play a TK Kari early or you swing into one, um, it kind of makes things more linear for you because if they ever have a TK and Kari, you probably just want to do your best to match their security until you have a lethal OTK turn, right? So if they slam down a TK and Kari right at the beginning, then you raise up the Strabi. You're like, oh, should I swing with Strabi? You should. You should never let them have less security than you, especially if they have a TK and Kari. That's too much value, and you could also potentially hit into something else that's worse. So that makes things more linear, where you're basically just setting up for an OTK, and they're going to be kind of influenced to swing. And whenever they chip at your security, right, they get you down to 4. Then you have the green light to maybe chip them for 1, etc. Just match them right when they have a TK and Kari, match their security, and go kind of for like an OTK turn. Probably said the
Yeah,
same over like 4 times over. Sorry about that.
no, you're fine. Because I know the yellow matchup plays completely differently than every other matchup because it's the only real deck that's like recovering and trying to control the field. Everything else is a lot more, I guess, aggressive and proactive, and that's the only deck that's like sit back and chill. So, would you take that like chip style approach to almost every other matchup and then switch your mindset to OTK when you see yellow?
I think actually the mindset of chipping early and then setting up a lethal turn or threatening a lethal turn is actually um probably how I approach every single matchup. Although it's different for yellow. Um, I will say though, for instance, let's say the blue mirror, obviously very situational. There are times where you want to like just set up a board, and just kind of control everything. Your opponent puts on board, you control that. If they don't have tamers, and chipping early if you can is ideal in blue. Yeah, sure, you might hit into something bad, but you got to take calculated risks here and there. You swing into something, you see what it is, and then you could act accordingly, right? You react based on like what you see in their security. It's important to know like what cards you've seen and haven't seen, for them, and you gotta just. There are risks that have to be taken, but the majority of wins I've had, especially against the blue hybrid, was chipping early or swing. Like, all right, sorry, let me just track. Let me go off on a tangent here. The majority of times that you're going to be chipping, especially against the blue mirror, is going to be with Beowulf. And you really only want to, chip with Beowulf if you're getting value off of it. Um, Either bouncing something or maybe your hand isn't that great and you need to cycle through a little bit. That's a lot. That's 2 draws off the Evo to get it to Beowulf, and then you bounce back the level 4 that you used. So Beowulf is very versatile in that it can cycle your hand. It chips, right? It chips and you get value off that. And actually, just the one point, if I could just segue into the blue mirror, a lot of decks and a lot of blue decks, they run 3 Davises, right? I'm sure you've seen
That seems fairly
most.
standard. Like even amongst non-blue hybrid decks, 3 Davises
Ab-
has been the standard forever.
Absolutely. And I think the reason why I was able to, to top both and be as consistent as I can is because I'm running 4 Davises. I think I personally believe could be wrong, but I think four Davises is actually necessary to make this deck as consistent as and good as it is over 9 rounds. Obviously, Dave, multiple reasons, right? It's a memory tamer. It's a pseudo rookie, pretty much. If you start in your hand, you can play Davis and potentially look for a rookie. Or if you still need to find a rookie or cycle through, you could go a hybrid over it, etc. But one of the major things that people that happens is, for instance, say I start off the game with uh, a rookie and raising, that I play Davis, right? They respond with their own rookie, their own Davis, and then they play like a Bokomon or something, or maybe another rookie. And so I'm there. You're thinking like, all right, I can just bounce this guy with Beowulf, right? Get value off that. I'll have two monsters on, two Digimon on board, and we're chilling. However, if you commit to that, you're essentially you're losing your memory tamer, right? The worst feeling is digivolving over a Davis and a Sora Joe. It's you really have to consider whether or not that is the best choice to go over your memory tamer, because there is a very reasonable chance that you will get choked, especially if you go over a Davis. However, what four Davises does, right, is you can see a lot of them. So what it does is it allows you to kind of go over these Davises, and for instance, like in that situation, right? If I had another Davis in hand, I absolutely will go one to Beowulf, bounces Boko, and then just end the turn by playing another Davis, right? So it kind of just recycled itself a little bit. So that's why I think four Davises is actually really really good. Um, because it just allows for less punishment if you should go over the Davis, if that makes sense. Plus, it's an insane security card. It cycles through. It's just a really good card.
Yeah. So speaking of like your matchups, what were your matchups for each of the event, if you recall them?
Yeah. Saturday for round one was a red hybrid. Round two was a Lilith. 3 and 4. I think those might have just been blue. Um, I did play. I did play one green hybrid. It might have been actually like round 4 or 5. On Saturday, and then towards the top, it was more blue. I'm trying to remember if I played anything other than blue once I got past round 6. No, I think past that point it was just strictly blue on Saturday. Um, and then on Sunday I played a Jesmon round 1, round 2 I believe. Different variations of blue as well on Saturday. Like I did play a Gabubon blue, which can be different, but relatively you want to kind of do the same thing. Sunday, yeah, it was Jesmon, another blue. Uh, I think a Lilith loop here. I did not play a single Cherubi either Saturday or Sunday. I did play. Oh yes, I did play 2X antibodies. I do remember that. That is a unique matchup actually. The X antibody matchup can be very scary actually.
Hmm.
I did play. And then I think Sunday it was just more blues, and I did play a red ancient OTK. It was actually Chungman,
Hmm.
which was fascinating.
Yeah. So I guess I only had two questions left that Zenitsu hadn't really touched on. First one was you aren't running any Lobo, which I thought was really interesting. Just the four of the two new hybrids and then the one Kendo. So did you think that like I guess what's your reasoning behind that? Only nine hybrids or nine level four hybrids at least, and then no Lobo at all.
Yeah, I think well, I think the majority of blue lists actually would run the reason why Lobo is you don't want it starts feeling clunky if you run that many hybrids in this deck, because essentially Beowulf does recycle a lot of hybrids. So if you're really just kind of managing your resources somewhat efficiently, you really don't feel the loss of like maybe let's say a 10th hybrid here or there. I will say though, right? Obviously, 4 Korikakus and 4 Kumas are mandatory.
Mhm.
I think those are the gold standard, and I do think 9 is the perfect number. And I think Kendo is actually the one hybrid you want as your ninth. Kendo came up for me in so many situations. I would say, and I definitely just want to actually throw praise to this card as well because Kendo is massive, right? It allows you to kind of For instance, let me give an example. Let's say you have boosts on the field, right? But you can't utilize it. Well, to preface that, I'd say the most lethal combo, especially in the blue mirror, is if someone has both the full floodgate out, right? Both a Madoki and a Sayaka, right? And really, like for instance, say I have two boosts, a Memory Tamer. They have a Madoki and Sayaka, so I can't really Beowulf. I can't do much actually. What Kendo allows me to kind of circumvent that, right? Bounce the Madoki, pop my boosts, and maybe react to the Sayaka or anything else on the board. And if Kendo survives, let's say for instance Kendo gets value, he bounces a rookie and he survives. That's a card that needs to be dealt with, right? It's a card that it can constantly bounce when attacking, right? You don't need to bounce anything under the source like Beowulf, so it needs to be dealt with, right? Either by stunning it or having someone crash into it or swing over it with Beowulf, right? If it's not dealt with, it gets consistent value. I think one game actually my Kendo was able to get two or three swings and just get insane value off of it. And for instance, let's say they stun it, right? They strip the source and stun it, and they're thinking that's one of the bad things about Beowulf, right? Is that once it gets source stripped and stunned, it's really just there as Sora Joe fodder for your opponent, especially in the blue mirror. However, if that happens to Kendo, it's as simple as digivolving for one over it with Kurikaku, or maybe even into a Beowulf, right, to potentially choke your opponent and not let them get the sword and joke it. So it's a very versatile card. It came up for me a lot. I do think Kendo is very important, and I would not take him out.
So
And
I
then, oh, go ahead.
yeah, so I was gonna. You probably maybe just entered it a little bit, but so I know we mentioned like the floodgates, like the four and four seem to be fairly standard, but that being said, you're running what eight different like memory gain cards that aren't tamers. Three howling, four hammer spark, and one ice wall. At least in security. So um, did you feel as though those like were too clunky, or like you really appreciated your access to them? Like, I guess what's the thought behind that?
Yeah, I personally felt like this was a very. I didn't feel them. It was clunky at all, and part of the reason I believe is because I believe a lot of the mirrors I was playing against, and I'll say, and I guess I could just segue into this point. I think an important thing that a lot of blue players aren't doing, especially in the mirror, um, this just will allow me to, is right. Say for instance, and this is usually happens mid to late game. It's your turn. You raise, you hatch an egg. Strawbymon obviously has an on-play effect, right? So you're like, oh, maybe I don't want to digivolve on the egg, so I'll just digivolve this Madoki into the egg zone, right? Without second thought. I think that's a really big mistake that a lot of players do, and I think they have to understand the value, especially in the mid to late game, of hard playing, right? Either a Sayaka or a Madoki, because that it adds so much value. A simple hard play of a Madoki or Sayaka, and I think that wasn't happening enough against me, into which in where it affected kind of like these four hammers, the Sice Wall or the boosts, from really disrupting my play, if that makes any sense. But I guess like if you look at the finals on for I believe it was Carta, they had a Sora Joe out. I already had a Beowulf that was stunned and stripped. So he was gonna get there. He was gonna get value off that anyway. And I believe I was at two memory, and I was calculating. You just gotta calculate. There's a lot you have to think about. Like what outs can my opponent have here? I had a Madoki on field already, and then just a simple hard play of a Sayaka, right? It just completely disrupts everything. I digivolve the Strabi in the back, not a Sayaka, and then I just hard played the Sayaka because they can't do anything with that at three with both the Sayaka and Madoki on board. So I think a lot of blue players need to start kind of utilizing the hard play of both the Sayaka, like at certain situations, right? In ideal situations, just a simple hard play of a Sayaka Madoki could really disrupt like immense.
And yeah, that's kind of partially what makes blue hybrid so good is just the overabundance of tamers that are high value, the slew of different hybrids that they have access to, just the tempo and efficiency and draw that the deck has as a whole. Like it's really poised to be like a really powerful deck. So with that being said, what are your actual thoughts on the overall meta and or like going deeper, the health of this type of a format?
Um, Yeah, I will say that I definitely agree that blue is a little bit overtuned. I would say it has a lot of it has a little too much going for it, especially with the access to the floodgate, as you guys say. Um, is it held? It's hard because really the one thing to combat it was yellow. It's just that yellow, even then, it's not too much of a counter, I would say, and yellow doesn't really work ideally in these long tournaments. It's not really just adjusted for it. I would argue. Um, is it healthy? I do agree that blue does need to get potentially, it is like I said, it is overtuned. I don't really know how else to put it. I'm not sure what could have been done to maybe kind of lessen this dominance that blue has. I guess the main thing is just that it's like as you already stated, it's insanely consistent. Insanely consistent. Beowulf, the bounce back, the recyclability of it all. And I do agree. I actually will agree that it could lead to an unhealthy kind of meta, in some instances. But that being said, uh, I'll still play it. I enjoy playing blue, but it is hard to say. I'm not really sure how to kind of go about that question.
No, that's fair because I know a lot of people are really looking excited for BT8 just because there's actual answers for blue hybrids. I don't know if you're planning on playing blue hybrids through BT8 because I still think the deck is very powerful there. It's just again, people like having actual answers to be able to respond. What do you think like the longevity of blue hybrids is going into BT8?
Um, I actually don't think blue hybrid will be that much of a problem in BT8. Obviously, Imperial and Armor Rush will probably take the lead as a kind of a more dominant blue deck that people will probably complain about. Um, I haven't play tested BTA too much to really address that. Although I do know that the potential power that Imperial has, Imperial Jagras that is, seems very scary. However, Yellow Hybrid does seem to be a menace in BT8. I will say that.
Yeah, because you mentioned that like in BT8, because I'm under the impression, with my limited playtesting and just like looking ahead, that for the most part the deck really doesn't change that much. It gets a couple of new megas to play around with. It gets Rapidmon as a good tool and some good use of two color cards, but like the core of yellow is for the most part staying. It's just getting more powerful tools.
Yeah, I think probably the most dangerous yellow variant that we're gonna see is just strictly yellow, and actually it does alter a decent amount. Cody is a huge three cost card that will be introduced in BT8. Probably a four of I would say. Um, as you said, four rapid mons will be big, and I think just the yellow base with like Patamons or whatnot, Ophanimon fall down mode. I think that will be a deck that will actually be very very hard to combat. Because what right Imperial and all them what they want to do is that you can I think I did say otherwise I would approach it differently, but like you can set up an OTK turn absolutely with Imperial and all these decks. It's just that it's going to be a lot harder, I would say. And if you do, even if you get them down to one or two, the yellow hybrid just has just the engine itself has just way too much recovery to bounce back.
Because I know a lot of the like sorry to stray away from this and talk about like a little bit of
Yeah.
BTA. I know like Imperial is all VMon focused and they're not running the floodgates, which leads like blue hybrids to be in a pretty interesting position because they're still one of the premier decks to take advantage of those types of tools, which are still going to be relatively important.
Yeah, I just think blue hybrid probably wouldn't have a favorable matchup against probably this iteration of blue hybrid. I don't really know what else kind of BTA adds to it too much, but this iteration of blue hybrid probably just Imperial probably just take just I wouldn't know. I haven't really play tested a lot, but I would imagine that Imperial just should just beat it pretty handily. I believe as well as some of the I'm not sure about Armor Rush, but because Imperial has a way to just bounce like some of the floodgates, right? And innately with Pale Dramon, as well as other things, right? Stunning it, fighter mode, etc.
I
stuff like
mean,
that.
I'd go as far as just to say the entire Jogus mechanic counters blue hybrid because
Yeah,
you can
pretty
stun
much.
their
Yeah,
Digimon and Jogress and they're no longer stunned.
that's true.
Um,
Forgot about that.
so that in itself almost kind of like turns the deck very unfavored into that matchup. But I guess my last question is the only non-blue player here, because I've been playing Cherubi the whole time. As far as what like if I'm not playing blue, what am I playing to beat blue? So you said you didn't play against it this weekend, but like, what do you think about that matchup? As far as, do you think Cherubi not necessarily is favored at least, but like has like a decent chance of beating blue consistently?
I wouldn't say. I would say Cherubi, under the right circumstances, absolutely. However, consistently, I wouldn't say they'd be able to beat Blue just because Blue has too much. Especially if Blue's playing optimally, right? Sayaka will just counter any acceleration into Rihihi.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think the Cherubi variant runs a lot of kind of memory gaining stuff. I could be wrong. Maybe some variants will. So Madoki won't be as important as Sayaka. I think Sayaka is
Mostly
very.
just blinding ray, I want to say.
Gotcha. Yeah, blinding ray and a potential like Boko later on.
Mm,
When you're going for game right with tamers. I just think blue, right? If blue in that matchup as well, it's kind of very similar to a potential Lilith, right? You really just want to chip early
mm,
and set up a lethal turn. Because I mean, the longer it takes to beat purple, the worse it gets for you as a blue player. If they're able to get a lot of tamers out, set up that one turn where they pop a death claw, pop their cherubi, and yeah, two bushies come out, a boko comes out, where two bokos come out, where they're able to get a significant amount of memory, stuff like that. So you definitely just want to chip early, maybe with your Madokis, get value with your Beowulfs early. I do think blue is heavily favored actually in that match. Maybe not heavily, but definitely favored. So I do think it's difficult for Cherubi to kind of beat that on a consistent basis if both players are playing optimally and
mm.
luck is a non-factor.
Yeah, I guess I'd agree with that too, especially like from the other side of the table, because a lot of the times my success has been with people being afraid to either chip or to just swing, period. A lot of my advantageous board states I had against blue was when they had like a Madoki, a Sayaku, and a Strabi, and then one hybrid, and then I just Schwartz and clear their board, and but they were too afraid to swing, and they had 4 or 5 bodies
Yeah.
out.
Yeah. Calculated swing, like as a blue player, you definitely need to take calculated like swings and risks. I mean, if you hit into something bad, it happens, right? But that's part of the game. Luck is definitely a factor in every single TCG. So yeah, you need a like you can't be afraid to take swings when sometimes they're necessary.
I guess the other point being too, from experiencing the matchup more, um, I guess intimately throughout the Saturday's event, the only one I participated in, was it felt like we were almost playing different games because purple, I only had the one of Gazimon as my only floodgate, and for my opponent being able to constantly like make it so that I cannot reduce the cost of my Digimon or gaining memory off of Pokemon, the games I usually lost were both of those and more. Like I would hit a Hammer Spark in security, or they would start their turn, Digivolve for 0 with Boko, Digivolve for 1 into um crap. I keep thinking Rihi, that's mine. Um but
Bayo?
Bayo,
Bayo and just the entire idea that like we're almost playing by different rules. You get a free hybrid every turn. You get a one cost level 5 every time, whereas I'm paying 2 for every level 4 and 3 for every level 5 is just crazy.
yeah, I agree. There's too many weapons that blue has, especially.
And then as a blue hybrid player myself, just because I've always been playing blue from the beginning, and blue hybrids is right now just the blue deck to play. What kind of advice outside of what you've already given, like additional advice to help a blue hybrid player improve, at least in the remaining of the BT7 format?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as the prior, like disregarding the stuff I already said, I'll probably just say it again just to highlight it as well. Um, situations where you have to hard play Madoki and Sayaka is huge. Knowing when or if you should evolve over a Sora Joe or Davis to potentially get value with Beowulf. Oh, you always have to be, think about the next play. Like, if I do this, I'm leaving my back line kind of empty. Really, really think about it. Don't just kind of, have your thought process just railroaded to like, oh, all right, I have to get this off board. Sometimes you don't really have to, get an opponent's Digimon off board, right? Leaving an opponent's Digimon off board, it kind of it influences them in a way to potentially swing at your security, right? And for instance, my deck itself has 28 Digimon, right, and 22, let's say, security bombs, right? So that's like a 45% chance that should they swing, right? For instance, if I play a Sora Joe and they, as opposed to, in that situation I said before where they had a Boko and I had a Davis, I go into a Beowulf and then I play another Davis. Let's say I take a different approach where I do something else for two, or I try doing something else to maximize value for two or three, and then I play a Sora Joe. That Sora Joe kind of influences that they have to do something with that Boko, right? They have to either swing with it and potentially hit something even 45% chance, and then you could kind of take an educated guess based on like what you've seen so far in your hand and other stuff, what could potentially be in your security. But that's like going even further. But like it doesn't always have to be like I have to get value with this Beowulf, especially if you have to go over your own memory tamer or Sora Joe. I'd say that's very important how you manage both your memory tamer, and when to use Beowulfs. Another important thing as well, is just the always keep track of, you know does my opponent can my opponent potentially have lethal. For instance, this is a very simple example, is in the final for Carta Magica, right? It was game 3, I believe. I think my opponent, he had to digivolve over his Davis to kind of, or over a tamer, to kind of answer the board that I set up, because I did set up a potential maybe lethal, I think. And then there you go. He had no backline except a Sora Joe. So I was able to just Beowulf, swing over one, bounce the other level 4. I was at 2 security because he did ship me down, so that was very scary. But blue has no way of getting any extra attacks than what you see, unless of course they're running Magna. But even then, you could kind of calculate for that a little bit. So he had a Sword Joe and a Baby and Raising. I had 2 security, and that, like, immediately you should think like there's absolutely no way he could potentially have lethal on me. Maybe what I could do now is set up a potential board here that he has to answer, and then set up lethal for next turn, right? As opposed to maybe swinging in security, right? Because if you hit a tamer, if I swung into security instead of setting up a wide board, I could potentially have given him game if I hit into like a Davis or something like that. So always keep track of could he have lethal, especially if I hit into something. And I think the most important thing is like threatening, like just the mere threatening of like lethal is very big, and it makes your opponent have to react. And then in which way, and if you give yourself an opportunity to react to how he deals with your lethal, it's I think that's probably the most important dynamic, especially in the blue mirror. If that makes any sense, I don't know. I think I'm not explaining it too well, I believe.
No, I totally understand what you're saying. It's going back to like what you were saying with calculated attacks. It's like, should I try to set something up or should I try to push?
Yeah,
And most of the time, like especially in this type of a format, as far as like what I'm reading into your words with, you usually want to set up to gain advantage better, because you could use your advantage cards to help push for lethal at the same time.
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, pretty much. Right. A hard play of Sayaka to negate anything they do. Plus that Sayaka is an extra attack, right? That could threaten lethal at the same time.
Right.
I will say as well, it's very important that you keep track of what you see that your opponent is kind of. For instance, in that game in Carta Magica, I believe my opponent took the Supreme Cannon, and then I hit an ice wall in security. So right then and there, I knew that like going wide. The only issue with going wide is be wary of a Zulongmon. But I had a Madoki on field. I think I had 2 Madokis on field, so there's no way to out that really except without an Aqua Viper, at his 3 memory. So like if you saw Supreme Cannon, right, you saw Ice Wall, right? Like that should just make that just makes things easier, right? The only way to out kind of a wide board for blue to like save yourself is either through a well-timed ice wall or like a supreme cannon. But you really just have to keep track of what you've seen your opponent like mill, or not mill, or like just bottom deck or whatnot, and just it's you have to react to situation. Just consider the best possible like choice.
Okay. And then do you have just like any generic advice, just the act of playing Digimon to like give to newer players who might be watching this?
Um, let me see. Just I guess some generic advice, just in terms of playing. I definitely think it's definitely easier to play when you just have a cooler head, right? When you're not as nervous or worked up under kind of these tense situations. On Saturday, I was a lot more nervous and stressed out than I was on Sunday. Sunday, I was a lot more carefree, and I did see that difference immensely, right? It really helps to, and obviously some people can't, it's sometimes it's hard to kind of get through that. And what I feel actually helps a lot is kind of talking through your plays like out loud. That actually helps me a lot. That helps me kind of organize my thoughts. What used to happen before, where I would think about a play that I was going to do, and I would think about other stuff, and then I would forget about the original play that I was going to do, or I wouldn't really. But just talking out your plays out loud actually really helped me kind of either catch myself. Like, all right, I'll go for Beowulf here into one. Oh no, there's a Sayok on the field. I can't do that. I believe that actually helped me a lot, and it really just allows you to organize your thoughts. And that would be the advice I have for like any kind of new players for TCGs or doing these long tournaments, etc.
Okay. That is all really good advice. And I know you've been having a bit of a busy schedule as of late, so I don't want to keep you around too much longer. I want to appreciate everything that you said here in taking time out of your busy schedule. And I wanted to also congratulate you again on your two consecutive tops. That's very hard to do. You literally reached Dan Vang status in one weekend. Because he's the only other person who I know has actually done that consecutively. Um,
Dan Vang is a legend.
he is indeed, and now you are proceeding to be up there. Are you planning on playing in the third Ultimate Cup, or were you opted out of that one?
I will be taking part in the Top Cut Third Ultimate Cup. We'll see if I could do the
Hit the
three-peat.
three-peat, yeah.
Hit the three-peat. Well,
The
you're gonna
triple
have to pass
crown.
through. Yeah, that tournament is also looking stacked. All of these tournaments are really stacked. Lots of good players, lots of fun to be had. I'll be participating in that as well. So hopefully, I'll take some of your advice, and hopefully that can get me relatively far as well. And hopefully, any of you who are listening to this can take this advice too, and be able to improve your plays, not only just for this format, but for other future formats. Just because some of this advice is a little bit more on the generic side and could be applied to various other decks outside of blue hybrids.
Yeah. I guess the last thing I had to say before we close out here is I know you said blue hybrids wasn't exactly something you were interested in playing in BT8. So what were you at least? I know you said you haven't done any playtesting, but what are you eyeballing at least moving forward?
Oh yeah, I'll definitely be giving the Imperial a go, as well as a very probably the Armor Rush, but not the kind of Rookie Rush variant. More of
Mm,
the four Chimera, four Shaco top end.
okay.
More of a kind of a mid-range, kind of,
Yeah,
yeah,
that
Armor
fits
Rush
right into
variant.
like the line. At least it's most akin to hybrids that I can think of, at least in
Yeah.
its goals and deck construction.
So those are the two decks I'm definitely going to be interested in taking and testing out.
Okay. Are
And
there any other like shout outs slash thanks you want to do before we close it out?
Yeah, I just want to give a big shout out to Jackson Huang. I did play test with him a lot. I wouldn't say a lot actually, but I did play test with him a good amount prior to this tournament, the Blue Mirror, as well as we did play in DigiFest the final. He did smoke me there, but he's the one where really I learned the most from, especially in the mirror. So just big shout out to him. I definitely wouldn't have been able to take these two cups without him.
Okay.
And yeah, big shout out to him.
With
And
that,
thank you so much for having me on here as well. It's been a pleasure.
sure. Yeah, good to have you. Okay. With that, we're gonna close it out a little longer than we had potentially expected, but more
Sorry
is
about
always better. No, just you had a lot to say, and people have a lot to like consume now. So, with that, I guess we'll close it out. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Have a good night, everyone.